Hello and welcome again to another episode of Swish Money Live. I'm here today with the wonderful, wonderful, stupendous, spectacular Vinayak. Just like all great Brazilian soccer players only need one name. Vinayak, how are you doing today?
Doing really great. Thanks for having me. Really excited to do this.
Awesome, and we're really excited to have you. Before we get started, really quick reminder that if you haven't already, definitely like and become a subscriber to our YouTube channel. We're going to be coming out with videos on a regular basis, talking to a lot of awesome people about everything under the sun for personal finance, for saving money, for budgeting, for a lot of everything related to getting a control over your finances and really becoming a rock star in terms of your own money situation. Today, we're going to be focusing on the power of your personal network. It's one thing that I think that not a lot of us focus on a day-to-day basis, but for those people that take it seriously and think a lot about how to work with the people around them in interesting and creative ways, it can be something that can be really powerful. And no one knows about this better than our guest today. So Vinayak, why don't we start off with just kind of giving a little bit of a background to you, who you are, and what you do.
Sure thing. So my name is Vinayak, and currently I'm the founder and CEO at a Boston startup called Drafted. We're a small VC-backed startup, and we work mostly on helping both companies and individuals leverage their networks in a meaningful way for fun and profit, and also hiring. One of the things that I did before was I actually ran the mobile team at Kayak and also did a lot of technical recruiting there, which is kind of the time when I started to realize the real value behind both my own personal network and also the networks of the people around me. So super excited to dive into it more. And you can check out Drafted at explore.drafted.us.
And I think that people who are looking for kind of budgeting information might wonder what it has to do with recruiting. But there is this kind of fundamental thing that Drafted was based off of, which is sort of what we're getting at, which is that it really matters how you use the network that you've created. So why don't you kind of start off telling us a little bit about some of that base philosophy behind Drafted and why it matters growing and having a good, strong personal network.
Sure thing. So one of the things that I think is evolving in terms of how we work and how we make money and how we manage both personal and corporate finance is actually related to hiring, and specifically to referral-based hiring. So if you're a professional referrer to a company, then you might call yourself a headhunter or recruiter, where you're basically referring people in your network to companies in order to make money. And most companies also have something called an employee referral program, which, if you're employed by a company, odds are that your company has something like, hey, there's a $1,000 referral bonus if you refer a friend to this company and they get hired. And I would say that this is actually one of the most underappreciated ways to make real money and actually help your friends and help your company along the way. So really excited to talk more about that. But the bottom line is that most of you know at least 5 people right now that you haven't thought of that you could refer to a company and take home between $5,000 to $10,000 each. And I would say that's like probably the biggest, quick, short-term win that's sitting underutilized in your inbox right now.
But the interesting thing is that people do this already, don't they? I mean, that's the thing with personal network and currency. There are good reasons why people find value in referring each other, even if there isn't that money incentive, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And the reality is that most people don't make referrals professionally for money. That's not the primary reason. A LinkedIn survey showed that 97% of people that make referrals don't find money to be the primary motivator. This is actually very important because the fact that the money isn't the primary motivator is what means that their referral is high quality, because they're making it for a couple of different reasons. They're making it to help their friend. They're making it to potentially help the company and really add value to both those, to both their friend and to the company, and not just looking out for themselves. Of course, in the process, because they're doing the company a really valuable service, they might end up making a great chunk of change. But the key here is that the primary motivation that's driving them to take these actions aren't money related, but the rewards are money.
Yeah, it's funny. Maybe this is going to get too deep too quickly, but why do we help our friends? Like, I mean, it sounds like a silly question, but like, honestly, humans are selfish by nature, right? And I think there's something deeper there of, like, and I'm like this. I help people all the time. Like, I like to help other people, but why do we do that?
I think there's a few different reasons. I mean, I think if you asked a pop psychologist, they might say something like reciprocal altruism, where essentially people are altruistic because they expect some altruism in return, right? The kind of the old quid pro quo. There's kind of the other, maybe more, slightly more spiritual belief around like professional karma, which is basically, hey, it's like if you're doing good things by the people around you, what goes around comes around, and eventually someone's going to help you out. But I think, at a very instinctive level, I think at least, most of us catch at least one or two really great breaks, simply because someone wanted to help us out when they didn't have to. I mean, that certainly happened to me in my career at least a dozen times, and I bet it has to most of the people who are watching. And we kind of feel this sense of wanting to give back or wanting to pay it forward, and that's not just because we're altruistic. It's because of this notion that we tend to view other people and project ourselves onto them. And so we think, well, when I was in that person's position, someone helped me out, right? And so if I don't help out this person right now, then I'm kind of invalidating the reasons for the other person helping me out, thereby not really potentially deserving the help that I got in the past, right? So it's kind of this sense of self-projection, which actually is one of the big reasons why we tend to help other people in these situations, because we see them the same way that we see ourselves.
Yeah, I definitely think that's true. I also think that there's this difference in dichotomy between people that have like kind of an abundance theory that the world should be something where everybody kind of helps each other and that everybody benefits from that, and kind of like 1 + 1 = 3 and all that type of stuff. Versus there are some people who have kind of the inverse of that, and it's kind of like everybody's cutthroat fighting against each other, and you can't like give an inch because then you'll lose an inch and that type of thing. Mm-hmm. And it seems like the sort of fundamental nature of being able to trust in this network and see benefits from it is believing that the world works better in this sort of more abundance mindset of everybody kind of thinking of trying to help each other.
I mean, absolutely. I think that's like very, very core to like how humans operate. I mean, humans are social. Man's a social animal, and when we work better when we work in teams. We accomplish bigger things, right? We wouldn't be able to, like SpaceX wouldn't have been able to launch Falcon Heavy if it wasn't for a great team of people that all wanted to succeed together, right? If they were all just trying to succeed individually, they would have ended up, just launching like 1,000 paper planes, right? It's because they worked together that happened, and that extends beyond teams, because especially as work is becoming more dispersed, and the kind of future of work is now. People are jumping jobs more quickly. They're working on different projects, and that means that like their networks are even more valuable to them, and they don't view only their existing team or their existing company as the people that they work with. They view their entire network as their team, and that's like the team that you're working with, right? So I think that there's definitely like a mindset shift happening in that sense too, where especially if you're a freelancer, right, then you're going to help other freelancers who are working on different projects, even if you're not working with them, because you know that at some point that's going to come around and help you back.
Yeah, so let's dive into what are some tips for people who want to have like a strong network? I mean, I think we've kind of talked about that it benefits you in different ways, like depending on what you're trying to do, and maybe we could talk about that in a minute. But just in terms of growing and nurturing, your network, do you have any kind of tips for people?
I would say, the single biggest thing that I would say that I do that everyone can do is over-index on saying yes to requests for help. Often, even if they don't really seem worth your time, I mean, I think, a lot of people view time as a valuable resource, and if I'm spending time helping someone else, I'm not spending that time helping myself or helping my team or maybe helping my close friends and family. But try to go out of your way to help at least a couple of people every day or every week who not necessarily like your top priority. And I think that will, if you get in the habit of doing that, you'll naturally become a person that tends to, that tends to overhelp rather than underhelp. And I think that's, that'll pay long-term dividends in places where you don't expect.
Well, what about on the flip side? So I agree with what you're saying. But I think once you start doing that, the one thing you run into is an issue on the other side, that there has to be a balance, right? That like at some point when you say yes to everything and you are helpful to other people, you'll eventually be asked way too many times than you could possibly fulfill. And actually that could be doubly negative, because not only are you potentially doing stuff that takes away from other things that you should be doing more of, but then also you're spreading yourself too thin. So even for the people that you agree to help, you aren't actually giving them the level of help that you could be. So what's a way that we can kind of balance that?
Great question. So yeah, and I guess to boil down the question, like what's the filter, right? How do you decide? And I would say the rule of thumb that I use, especially if someone asks me for an in-person meeting or a call, or kind of what I would consider to be more than a few minutes of my time, which is a significant commitment and has some opportunity cost for me, is I ask myself the question, am I the best person to help this person with their problem? Like, am I the best person who this person can access, that can actually help them? And if I'm not, then that would be a time when I might say no, or I'd point them in a better direction. Because in a lot of cases, I mean, so for example, if someone's coming and asking me, how do I write a resume, right? Then I can certainly help them with that, but but they don't necessarily need my help, right? They just need someone's help who's qualified to give them assistance on that. And there's probably a lot of people in their network who can do that, that aren't me. So unless I feel like I have like something uniquely valuable to contribute to that to that person's problem, which they won't get elsewhere, I'm way more inclined to help, because that way I can make sure that I'm contributing in places where I'm adding unique value, and places where that person will really, really appreciate it.
Okay, so that's on the side of you giving help to other people. But on the flip side, for you asking for help, I think that there is also another different type of challenge, which is that you may need help for something, and you may know that someone else can give you help. But there's a subtle aspect to that you can't ask somebody for the same person for the same thing, like on an everyday basis. You know what I mean? Like There's only a certain amount of currency there. So like, what are some guidelines and tips for like how and when you actually ask for help?
I would say if you want to get really analytical about it, I mean, you can follow kind of the give, ask rule, right? So you ask for help 25% of the time, and you give help 75% of the time. And I think if you kind of follow that at a global level, then it's okay if you end up over-indexing a little bit on one person or another person, because it evens out in the end, and maybe you'll be helpful to some of their friends. Because I mean, I think at the end of the day, the reality is that it's never going to be a 1-to-1 ratio. Like there's always going to be some imbalance, right? And that's why it's help. Otherwise, it would be a deal, right? And, if it was always perfectly equitable, then it wouldn't really, then it wouldn't be like, I would say, genuine help. There's a certain imbalance there, where where one party is giving more than they get, which makes it help. So I would say if you can kind of follow that at a high level, that's a pretty good place to start. And I think on the other hand, you can kind of get a sense of whether you're asking too much, and you have to be okay with hearing no from the people who tell you that you're asking too much. I think most people won't get upset if you ask one time too many, but they probably would get but you probably would start to lose credibility with them if you ask 2 or 3 times too many, right? So recognizing when you cross that first threshold is very important. And I mean, one of the things that I sometimes do with people that I feel like I'm asking too much from, is I'll actually ask them. I'll say, hey, I know I've been asking you for a lot of stuff over the last few days, and I know your time is valuable. So, if I'm asking you too much, just like please tell me, and I'll hold off for a while.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Probably one thing kind of baked into what you're saying too is kind of keeping it simple. I think if the request becomes too complex, like too taxing on them to think about, because there's certain things that you can do on your own, right? Like to simplify the request. Like so, if you don't, I think if most people, if they see you were too lazy to like do some of the background work and like make it easy for them, they're less inclined to help you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's definitely true. I mean, if you're asking someone for an introduction, at the very least, you can include a link to the LinkedIn profile of the person who you're asking, who you're asking them to introduce. You can tell them, you can write them like a 2-line blurb of why you think the introduction is valuable for both parties. You can send them something that they can just simply forward to the other person and say, hey, what do you think about this? Instead of them having to think, do a lot of thinking and think like, okay, now I have to go look up both people on LinkedIn and include their links in this introduction email or whatever, right? So you can do a lot of the heavy lifting behind the scenes, and you can help. You can make it easy for people to do favors for you. Like, never make it difficult for people to do favors for you. Nothing's more annoying than that to the person who's doing the favor.
Yes, that's a great tip. Great tip. Just really quick note for people that are joining us just now, we got a number of live viewers. If you have a question for Vinayak, you can go ahead and tweet with the hashtag SwishMoneyLive, and we can definitely ask Vinayak right here. So go ahead and ask whatever you want on Twitter. Just post a tweet with the hashtag SwishMoneyLive, and make sure that you, if you haven't already, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Now, Vinayak, I don't want to totally put you on the spot here, but I think one thing that's helpful is learning from our kind of failures, right? So like, when do you think that you've made a mistake in how you've managed your network and kind of how you learned from that?
That's a very, very good question. Give me like 1 second to think about that. And I mean, there certainly have been times. I'm trying to find one that I can articulate really well. I would say that.
Yeah, I can tell you what you're thinking. And I would imagine that some of yours fall under this category. Is when you're raising money for the first time as an entrepreneur and you're raising money, it's a whole game within a game. So even if you know kind of like how to network and talk to people, like whenever you're doing something, like there's all these different sub languages and sub interactions, way people that expect that you should interact with them. And if you aren't totally on the same page, then you inevitably do something that they consider as an offense, but you didn't totally unaware or whatever else, that you thought you were doing kind of the right thing. And I know that I've run into that a number of times, and it's taken some bruises on the face before you kind of learn what that language is and kind of play their game.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I've definitely, one way in which I've kind of messed up is that, this is whether it's raising money or sales or, pretty much anything business related, especially when you're a startup, compared to the industry you're in, you always start as a nobody, right? And everyone else is always a somebody. And so you're trying to leverage your network and you're trying to leverage their networks to help you go from being someone that no one in the industry cares about to someone that people in the industry want to talk to and potentially do business with. So one thing that happens as a side effect of this is that if you're kind of creating momentum, if you're asking for a lot of introductions from a lot of people at the same time, sometimes you might get over introduced. So for example, if one day I think like, oh, we're not getting enough meetings for this particular purpose, like let's say it's fundraising or sales, right? Then I might go on kind of like an introduction spree where I'll like suddenly, where 1 week I'll email, a dozen people in my network and say, hey, can you introduce me to so-and-so at this company or so-and-so at this firm because I want to talk to them about X, Y, Z, right? And if you end up doing that, you might end up in the situation where you get, where you're more successful at doing that than you anticipated originally, in which case, all of a sudden, now you have 10 or 12 people that all want to talk to, that are all willing to help you. But because it's that many people at the same time, you might have a hard time making it easy for them to help you because your bandwidth is limited too. And so that's definitely a mistake I've made before, where, I mean, there was one company in particular where, I was trying to get a sales meeting there, right? And I saw that I had a few mutual investors connected with that company. So I asked all those investors, not specifically about the company, but I asked all of them, like, hey, do you know any companies in the area that would be interested in what we're doing? Because I'd love to talk to them, right? And then I got an email from the CEO at this company in Boston, which will remain unnamed. And he said, hey man, we'd love to talk to you. What you're doing is really interesting. But I just want you to know that I just got an email from like 2 of my board members and 2 of my angels saying that I had to talk to you. And so of course I'm going to take the meeting, but you kind of made it kind of hard for me, because now all of my investors and board members think that I'm unwilling to take meetings with people, and it made me look bad for helping you, right? And so so that was like total faux pas on my part. At the very least, I could have at least given each investor like a list of specific companies to reach out to, or tell them like, hey, I already got an introduction to this person, so you don't need to introduce me again, right? Because it made that person's life harder, and actually potentially damaged their standing with their investors just for talking to me.
Yeah, but the thing is, so you learn from it. I mean, that is a good story. But you learn from it, and I feel like the reason why sometimes people underutilize their network, even though it can be a powerful thing for them, is that they're kind of afraid of these failures. But the thing is, like, I guess that's the thing, is that everybody has to realize that sort of running into these types of issues is par for the course. And yeah, it sucks, and you kind of are a little bit embarrassed, but you learn from it, and then you get better. So like, I think that should be part of the expectation for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So getting back to Drafted, we talked about on the employer side that they use the help of their employees to recommend people. The other aspect of that is getting, if I'm looking for a job, using my network, because I think when people are looking for a job, they might ask their friends in some ways or whatever. But how can they use? Are there ways to use Drafted if I'm somebody who's looking for a job?
Absolutely. So kind of today, the typical way that you would look for a job using web tools would be you would go and search around on maybe AngelList or Indeed or even Google. You try to find, you try to narrow down some companies and some jobs by criteria that you're looking for. Maybe you're looking for like a design job in Boston at a mid-sized company that's growing fast, right? And then you'll narrow down. You'll go and look at the company about pages. You'll kind of try to get a sense of the culture, and try to figure out, okay, here's like my 5 or 6 target companies, because I know that they have open positions that fit my interests. Then you'd go and look up those companies on LinkedIn or some other network, and you'd try to see if you're connected to anyone there. If you are, then you might email that person, or you might try to or you might text them if you're on texting terms with them, saying like, hey, I was just looking at your company and it actually looks really cool, and I saw that they're hiring for people that actually fit my skill set, and I happen to be in the market for a job. Do you think that's a good idea? Can I talk to you about it? Can we meet for coffee? Something like that. Sometimes you might do it in a slightly worse way, which is just emailing that person and saying, hey, can we meet for coffee to catch up, with like no agenda? And at the end of the coffee meeting, you like slip it in and you're like, hey, actually, I'm kind of looking for a job. Like, does your company have any openings, right? And so what we try to do is we try to make that whole experience, we try to cut it down from, like the 1 or 2 day search plus coffee meetings to a few seconds. So what Drafted does is it'll go through your network. It'll find out where the people in your network are working. It'll identify those companies. Then it'll identify the jobs of those companies that match your interests, and actually recommend what you should do, complete with an email template to ask for the introduction and to ask for the favor that we've optimized. So instead of like doing all of this, it'll just say, hey, you should talk to Jeff at Swish Money because he's hiring designers, and you have that exact skill set. So you should talk to Jeff and click here to send Jeff a quick note saying that you're interested in this specific design position. Or it might even say like, hey, you should get an introduction to Jeff at Swish Money from Vinayak at Drafted because they're buddies, and Jeff's hiring for people like you, and Vinayak knows both you and Jeff, right? So it tries to short circuit that process and tries to do a network first search instead of a job first search for your next career path.
Honestly, that's the way it should be. I mean, I think too many people go to the company first, and what matters so much more are the people you work with than even the thing that you're working on. I mean, that's one thing I talk a lot of people coming out of college that worry about, like, oh, I'm not working on this specific thing that I thought might be a good idea. But at the end of the day, if you are working with really talented people, people that you're excited to come into work with and who are going to help you and help grow your career, like that's way above, some of the other factors that you might think about.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I would say that's something how I've made most of my career decisions so far.
Cool. Okay, last question. So for Drafted, what does the future hold? What are you guys doing? Where do you see this going in the next couple of years?
That's a great question, and this is a good tie back to the original topic of conversation for this session. Is that today most people who find jobs and most people that are hired, most employees, are primarily evaluated based on their skill set at doing the job, and we have a lot of there's definitely a lot of like meritocracy culture, transparency culture that's evolving right now. That's hey, if you do the job, you get paid. And one of the things that I think is actually undervalued right now is the value of your network as you're going into a job, right? So, for example, if I had the option of hiring 2 software engineers, right, and they both are exactly the same skill level, they'll both, write good code, they'll both contribute to the company, they'll both work they'll both work really hard, be a positive influence on the team. But one of them has 10 engineer friends who I could also hire, and the other one doesn't, then the person that has the 10 other engineer friends that I can also hire could potentially have more value for the company, right? But neither their salary nor their equity compensation is determined based on that. I think secretly it's starting to be determined on that. And one of the problems is that there's no good way to evaluate that, right? I mean, there's really even for the people involved, right? I mean, it's really hard for me to say today, like, oh, this is the value of my network. Like, I know that it's valuable. It's really hard for me to quantify how valuable it is. Like, sure, I have, maybe I can say I have 1,000 LinkedIn connections, so like I have 1,000 points, or maybe there was a company called Clout that tried to do this. But I think in the future, everyone, especially as people change jobs more often, right? At any given point in time in your life, you're either hiring people, you're looking for a job, or you're helping your network, right? And so we want to be the place that you go to do all these 3 things. Specifically with your network and referrals and introductions in mind, right? So we want to be the first kind of introduction platform, the world's first referral network, where you can give intros, get intros, potentially make some money while doing it, and make it a really valuable resource for companies to kind of scale their hiring through networks, and for job seekers to short circuit their application process so that they never have to never have to go into like a black hole of resume piles again.
I haven't talked to you about this aspect of things yet before, but I love that idea. I'm serious. Like I've thought for a while about this, that there is definitely value on top of like the individual skill set of a person when that they have this ability to kind of bring in a lot of other people, especially when you're at a bigger company and you're actually trying to hire a lot of people. That it's valuable in a number of cases, because number one, like obviously if you did want to hire those additional people, but that's also some social proof, right? That like if you have like a strong network, that means that you're gonna be a good teammate in a lot of cases. So like I love that idea. That's great.
Yeah, our mutual friend Paul English has a good term for this. He calls them talent magnets.
Oh yeah. I have heard him refer to that before. So. Very cool. Well, Vinayak, I really appreciate you coming on. Now, I don't remember whether I mentioned this in the notes beforehand, but we do picks at the end where you can kind of have some link, and it can be random. It can be either something you want to promote or a cat video or whatever else you want to do. Do you have any picks for us today?
Well, obviously, the first one is a shameless plug, which is drafted.us, if you want to leverage your network for fun and profit. The second one is actually called referralprograms.org. Where you can actually, it's a free website. It's community contributed data where you can go and study like what different companies do in terms of like how they hire, what they want to hire for, and how their referral programs work. And the third one is actually diversityreports.org, which is another community data collection of diversity-based hiring data for different companies. Most companies right now, especially you're hearing a lot about this in the news and on TechCrunch about companies are hiring for diversity, or there might be some companies that are doing really poorly on diversity, and that's why they're in the news. And there's really no one place for people to go and kind of understand like what the landscape looks like, right? There's no one place for you to go and say, okay, like can I look at the top 20 companies in tech and see how they're doing on, in terms of like, how diverse their workforce is and so on and so forth, which might help you make better decisions when it comes to, which company do you want to join and why you want to join it. So those would be the three picks that I have.
Awesome. Definitely going to check that out. For me, I just have 2 picks. Number 1, subscribe to our YouTube live channel. Number 2, download Swish. It's a great budgeting app. Definitely check it out, and you won't regret it. That's it for this week. We got a bunch of shows lined up for next week that is going to be great. So join us again. Vinayak, thank you so much for joining us.
It's really fun. Thanks, guys.
All right. Have a good one. Have a great weekend.